It
My
breaks my
son
heart to
stood in the
stand
middle
here
of my
today.
living room and
He was
sighed
like a
like a
father to
grieving
me,
man.
truly.
I think
We will
Mom's
all
getting
miss him
senile,
dearly.
Jason told my
I'm
own
telling you all,
family while I
she is
sat 5
losing
feet
her
away.
mind.
She forgets things.
We can't
She gets
ignore this
confused.
anymore.
She's not safe alone anymore.
I'm so sorry this is happening,
A few
truly.
people looked down at me with pity.
We all wish there was
Others
something more we
avoided
could
my
do to
eyes
help you through
completely.
this.
Then
I can't
Amanda
stay
added
silent
softly,
anymore.
"We're only trying to protect
This is
her."
everything I saw, starting
Protect
from the
me.
beginning.
That was the word they used while secretly trying to take my house, my money, and my life away from me. What Jason didn't know was that for the past 3 weeks, I had recorded every lie he told. And in less than a month, those recordings would be played in court. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, I'd really like to hear your story in the comments. And if this story touches you in any way, please like and subscribe so you can stay with me through the rest of it. I always read your comments, especially from those watching late at night like I used to. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. The first year after my husband died felt like living underwater. Everything moved slower, quieter, heavier. Harold and I had been married for 43 years, and for most of that time our little brick house in Columbus, Ohio, had never stayed silent for very long. Harold always had an old jazz record playing somewhere. He hummed while fixing things in the garage. He talked to the television during football games like the players could hear him. After the funeral, the silence became unbearable. I started sleeping with the television on just to hear another human voice in the room. At 68 years old, I never imagined I would become one of those women who sat alone at the kitchen table, drinking coffee for 2 out of habit. But grief changes you in ways no one warns you about. It sneaks into ordinary moments, into empty chairs, into grocery store aisles when you accidentally reach for your husband's favorite cereal before remembering he's gone. For months, I barely heard from my son. Jason had always been busy. That was the excuse he used for everything. Busy with work, busy with clients, busy with life. Still, when he started visiting more often about 8 months after Harold's death, I was genuinely happy. At first, it felt like maybe losing his father had changed him. He started dropping by on Sunday mornings with coffee. "Thought you might need company," he said once, smiling as he handed me a paper cup. I remember how my heart warmed at those words. Because when your child grows distant over the years, you start blaming yourself for it. You wonder what you could have done differently. You become grateful for scraps of affection you once would have taken for granted. Jason began helping around the house. He fixed a loose cabinet hinge Harold never got around to repairing. He shoveled snow from my driveway during a February storm. He insisted on driving me to doctor appointments because, according to him, Columbus traffic is getting crazy. At first, I thought I was lucky. Some widows spend years abandoned by their children. Mine, I thought, had come back. Then, Amanda started showing up more often too. My daughter-in-law had always been polished in a way that made me feel slightly uncomfortable. She never looked messy, never sounded emotional. Even her smiles felt rehearsed sometimes. Still, she hugged me tightly every time she came over. "You shouldn't be alone so much, Noelle," she would say sweetly. One afternoon, she stood in my kitchen, turning slowly in a circle while staring at the walls. "This house is huge for one person," she said casually. "Must be exhausting to maintain." I laughed softly. Harold built half of it himself. "I think I can survive a few more years." Amanda smiled, but something about her expression felt strange. Like she was studying me instead of talking to me. A week later, Jason offered to help organize my bills. "You've got enough stress already," he said. "Let me take some pressure off." I hesitated. Harold had always handled the bigger investments, but after he passed, I took over everything myself. I'd been an accounting manager at a public school district for almost 30 years. Numbers didn't scare me, but grief exhausts you, and sometimes exhaustion disguises itself as trust. So I agreed. At first, it was small things. Jason set up automatic payments for utilities. He helped me reset passwords for online banking. He insisted on organizing my medication into plastic weekly containers. "You forgot your blood pressure pills twice last month," he reminded me gently. I couldn't even remember if that was true. That bothered me more than I admitted. Soon, he started collecting my mail before I even saw it. "I'm just sorting junk from important stuff," he explained. Then, one afternoon, I noticed my bank statements were missing. "I already filed them for you," Jason said quickly. Filed them where he changed the subject before I could ask. Little things started happening after that. I'd mention a doctor appointment, and Jason would interrupt. "No, Mom, your appointment is Thursday, remember?" Sometimes he was right, sometimes he wasn't. But after enough corrections, I started second-guessing myself constantly. That's the dangerous thing about manipulation. It doesn't begin with screaming. It begins with tiny moments designed to make you doubt your own mind. One evening, I walked into the kitchen and found Amanda scrolling through something on her phone. When she realized I was standing there, she quickly locked the screen. "You okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said slowly. She smiled too quickly. "You just looked confused for a second." Confused? That word started appearing more and more. At family dinners, phone calls, conversations with neighbors, Jason would laugh softly and say things like Mom's memory isn't what it used to be. Or she gets mixed up sometimes, always with that fake sadness in his voice. Like he was preparing people. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. After all, aging does strange things to confidence. You forget why you walked into a room once, and suddenly every misplaced key feels terrifying. But something deeper began bothering me. Jason wasn't simply helping me. He was slowly positioning himself between me and the rest of the world. One afternoon, my friend Carol called, asking why I missed lunch with her the week before. "I didn't know we had plans," I said. There was silence. "Jason told me you were having one of your bad memory days," she replied carefully. My stomach tightened. Bad memory days, I had never said those words in my life. That night, I confronted Jason gently. "Why would you tell Carol something like that?" He looked offended instantly. "Mom, I was covering for you. I didn't want her embarrassed. Embarrassed about what you forgetting things." The way he said it made me feel small, fragile, old. I stared at him for several seconds, trying to understand why the conversation suddenly felt like a trap. Then Amanda walked in carrying grocery bags. "Jason worries about you constantly," she said. "You should appreciate that." And somehow, by the end of the conversation, I was the one apologizing. A few days later, I woke up early and walked downstairs for coffee. Jason's voice drifted in through the partially open kitchen window. He was outside on the phone. "I'm telling you, the property alone is worth at least 700 grand, he said quietly. I froze. There was a pause. "No, she's still living there," he continued. "But not for long if this works." My chest tightened. This works. I stood completely still. Then he laughed softly. "We're getting there. People already notice something's off with her." For the first time since Harold died, genuine fear crawled through me. Not fear of aging, not fear of being alone. Fear of my own son. Jason stepped back inside a few seconds later and smiled when he saw me. "Morning, Mom." I stared at him over my coffee cup, and for the very first time in my life, I wondered if my son had just lied to everyone about me on purpose. After that morning in the kitchen, I started paying attention to things I had ignored before. Little things. The kind of things you brush aside because admitting the truth Feels too painful. Jason suddenly wanted copies of every important document in the house. Insurance papers, tax returns, the deed to the property. When I asked why, he always had an answer ready. "I'm just helping organize things, Mom. You shouldn't have to stress over paperwork at your age. I'm trying to make life easier for you." Every sentence sounded caring on the surface, but underneath something colder was beginning to show. About 2 weeks later, Jason invited the family over for my niece Rachel's birthday dinner. At least, that's what he claimed the dinner was for. By then, I had already started noticing how often he corrected me in front of people. Too often. If I said the dinner started at 6, Jason would smile gently and say, "Actually, Mom, it's 7. If I remembered a story one way, he'd shake his head carefully. No, that's not how it happened. At first, everyone laughed those moments off. Then slowly, they stopped laughing. They started watching me, watching whether I'd forget something, watching whether I'd repeat myself, watching for proof. That night at Rachel's birthday dinner, I felt those eyes everywhere. Jason and Amanda hosted the dinner at their house in Dublin, a suburb outside Columbus, full of expensive homes and people who cared too much about appearances. Amanda had decorated the dining room beautifully. Candles flickered in glass holders. Soft jazz played through hidden speakers. Everything looked perfect, which made what happened feel even uglier. I arrived carrying Rachel's gift and a homemade lemon pie. Amanda took the pie from my hands carefully. "Oh," she said with a tight smile. "You remembered dessert this time?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" Jason chuckled softly before Amanda could answer. "Last Thanksgiving, remember you forgot the pie in the oven." A few people laughed politely. Heat rose into my cheeks. "That happened once," I said quietly. Jason immediately touched my arm. "Mom, nobody's judging you." But they were. I could feel it. During dinner, Jason kept steering conversations toward memory, toward aging, toward decline. "Dad used to remember every baseball statistic ever invented," he said dramatically. "It's scary how quickly things can change when people get older." Amanda sighed sympathetically. "It's hard watching someone you love struggle." Struggle. There was that word again. I looked around the table. My cousin Ellen suddenly wouldn't meet my eyes. Rachel looked uncomfortable. Even my brother Thomas stared down at his plate. Jason had been planting seeds for weeks, maybe months. And now those seeds were growing. At one point during dinner, I excused myself to the bathroom. When I came back, the conversation stopped abruptly. The silence hit me immediately. I stood there holding the back of my chair. "What were you talking about?" Amanda exchanged a quick glance with Jason. "Nothing important," she said. Jason forced a smile. "We were just discussing whether it's safe for you to still drive long distances." The room went completely still. I felt something crack open inside my chest. "I drive perfectly fine," I said carefully. Jason nodded in that fake calming way that made my skin crawl. "Of course you think that. Think that. Like my judgment no longer counted." "I've never had an accident," I said. "No one's attacking you, Mom. There's nothing wrong with my mind." Again, silence. The kind that tells you people already made up their minds before you even spoke. Then Amanda leaned forward gently. "Noelle, sometimes people don't realize when they need help." That sentence hit harder than I expected, because suddenly I understood what they were doing. They weren't trying to convince me. They were trying to convince everyone else. I looked at Lily across the table. My granddaughter was staring directly at her father with a strange expression. Not agreement, confusion, maybe even discomfort. Jason noticed too. He immediately softened his voice. "We love you, Mom. he said. That's why we worry. There's something terrifying about watching someone weaponize concern, especially your own child. Because if you defend yourself too emotionally, you look unstable. But if you stay quiet, people assume the accusations are true. It's a trap, either way. The rest of dinner became unbearable. Every time I forgot a minor detail Jason noticed. Every time I paused to think Amanda exchanged worried looks with someone. At one point, I accidentally called Rachel by her sister's name. Jason jumped on it instantly. See, he said softly to the table. This is what I've been talking about. I wanted to scream. Instead, I forced myself to breathe slowly. Because deep down, I suddenly realized something horrifying. If I got angry, they would use it against me. So I sat there smiling weakly while my own son dismantled my credibility piece by piece in front of the family I had spent decades loving. Later that evening, I walked into the kitchen to grab my coat. Jason and my brother Thomas were talking quietly near the counter. They didn't realize I was standing in the hallway. I'm just worried she's declining fast, Jason whispered. Thomas sighed heavily. She seemed okay to me. You don't see what I see every day. That sentence chilled me, because Jason had carefully positioned himself as the expert on my own mind. He controlled the narrative now, and most people were beginning to trust him more than me. When Jason noticed me standing there, he smiled instantly. You ready to head home, Mom? I nodded slowly. The car ride back to my house felt painfully quiet. Jason kept the radio low while staring at the road. Then suddenly, he sighed. You embarrassed Amanda tonight. I turned toward him sharply. What you got defensive in front of everyone? My mouth fell open. You told people I was losing my mind. We're concerned about you. No, I said quietly. You're telling people something is wrong with me. Jason gripped the steering wheel tighter. You forgot Rachel's name. I mixed up two names. You've been forgetful for months. His voice had changed. Less patient now. More irritated. Like I was becoming inconvenient. When we pulled into my driveway, Jason turned off the engine but didn't unlock the doors immediately. You know, he said softly, sometimes people your age fight help because they're scared. I stared at him. Moonlight cut across half his face. For one strange second, he didn't look like my son anymore. He looked like someone studying me, calculating me, measuring how close I was to breaking. Then he finally unlocked the doors. As I stepped out of the car, he called after me gently. Try to get some rest, Mom. You've seemed confused lately. I stood frozen in the driveway while he drove away. The porch light glowed softly against the darkness. Inside that house were 43 years of memories with Harold. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family dinners, love. And suddenly, standing there alone, at nearly 70 years old, I realized something I never thought possible. My son was building a case against me, and somehow, everyone else was starting to believe him. 3 days after the dinner at Jason's house, he called me at 8 in the morning. Don't forget your doctor appointment today, he said. I frowned, still half asleep. My appointment is next week. No, Mom, he replied gently. It's today. I already confirmed it. For a moment, panic flickered through me. Had I written the date down wrong? I walked to the kitchen calendar hanging beside the refrigerator and stared at the square marked in blue ink. Jason was right. Thursday, 11:30 a.m., Dr. Keller. A knot tightened in my stomach. Maybe I really was becoming forgetful. That's how manipulation works when it's done slowly enough. Even intelligent people begin questioning themselves. By 10:30, Jason was in my driveway waiting to drive me to the clinic. You seem tired, he said as I got into the car. I didn't sleep well. That happens with cognitive decline sometimes. I turned toward him sharply. Stop saying things like that. Jason sighed heavily, like an exhausted parent dealing with a difficult child. I'm trying to help you. The rest of the drive passed in silence. Dr. Susan Keller had been my physician for nearly 12 years. She was calm, practical, and only a little younger than me. After Harold died, she'd checked on me several times personally. I trusted her, which meant Jason probably trusted her too. That thought unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. The waiting room smelled like coffee and disinfectant. Jason sat beside me scrolling through his phone while occasionally glancing up at me, watching me, studying me. When the nurse finally called my name, Jason stood immediately. I'll come with her. I can walk myself, I said. He smiled too quickly. Just making sure you don't miss anything. Inside the exam room, Dr. Keller greeted me warmly. Noelle, how have you been holding up lately? Before I could answer, Jason jumped in. Honestly, I've been worried. Dr. Keller's eyes shifted toward him carefully. Jason leaned forward in his chair. She's forgetting appointments, repeating herself, getting confused with bills. That's not true, I interrupted. Jason gave me a sad little smile. Mom, you forgot Carol's lunch last week. One missed lunch doesn't mean I'm mentally impaired. Dr. Keller remained quiet, listening. Jason continued anyway. She's also been more emotional lately. Agitated sometimes. Agitated. Another carefully chosen word. I could almost see him building the image piece by piece. Fragile. Forgetful. Unstable. I tried to answer questions directly whenever Dr. Keller asked me something, but Jason kept interrupting. She forgot that already. She gets mixed up. She told me the same story 3 times yesterday. Finally, Dr. Keller looked directly at him. Jason, I'd like to hear Noelle answer for herself. For the first time all morning, he looked mildly uncomfortable. I answered every question clearly. Date, current president, medication list, medical history, everything. Dr. Keller nodded several times while typing notes into her computer. But I noticed something else too. Jason wasn't nervous. He was confident. Like this appointment was only one step in a larger plan. Near the end of the visit, Dr. Keller suggested a few standard memory exercises and recommended monitoring stress levels after bereavement. Nothing alarming, nothing severe. Certainly nothing suggesting I was incompetent. Jason didn't seem pleased. So you're saying there's no concern at all? He asked carefully. Dr. Keller folded her hands. I'm saying grief and aging can affect memory in normal ways. I don't currently see evidence that Noelle is unable to manage her own affairs. A flash of irritation crossed Jason's face so quickly most people would have missed it. But I saw it. He recovered instantly. Of course, he said softly. I just want to protect her. Protect. That word again. After the appointment, Dr. Keller asked Jason to stop by the front desk to schedule follow-up blood work. The second he stepped outside the room, her expression changed. She lowered her voice slightly. Noelle, are you comfortable at home? The question startled me. Yes, I answered automatically. But the hesitation in my voice betrayed me. Dr. Keller studied my face carefully. You can tell me if something's wrong. For a second, emotion rose painfully into my throat. I almost told her everything. The comments, the corrections, the way Jason constantly spoke about me like I wasn't fully capable anymore. But then, shame stopped me. Because admitting your own child might be manipulating you feels humiliating somehow. Instead, I forced a smile. I think he worries too much. Dr. Keller didn't look convinced. She reached for her pen slowly. Grief can make family dynamics complicated, she said carefully. But I want you to know something important. I nodded. You are still fully capable of making your own decisions. Those words hit me harder than I expected, because I suddenly realized how desperately I needed to hear someone say them out loud. Before I could respond, Jason came back into the room. Instantly, Dr. Keller's expression became neutral again. "Well," she said brightly, "I'll see you both in a few months." On the drive home, Jason seemed irritated. He tapped the steering wheel impatiently at red lights. Finally, he spoke. "You shouldn't have gotten defensive in there." I stared at him. She asked me questions. I answered them. You sounded angry. Because you kept talking over me. Jason shook his head slowly. You don't even realize how emotional you've become lately. The exhaustion in his tone sounded practiced. Deliberate. Like he wanted me to feel guilty for defending myself. When we got back to my house, he followed me inside without asking. Amanda was already sitting at my kitchen table drinking coffee. That surprised me immediately. "How long have you been here?" I asked. "About an hour," she answered casually. Jason gave me the spare key. I looked at my son. "You gave her my key." Jason frowned. "Mom, she's family?" Something cold moved through me. Amanda glanced toward Jason. "Well?" she asked quietly. Jason sighed dramatically before turning back to me. "Dr. Keller thinks we should start helping you more." "That's not what she said. She agreed stress is affecting your memory." I stared at him in disbelief. He was twisting the appointment before we'd even been home 5 minutes. Amanda folded her hands carefully. "We've been discussing maybe taking over some responsibilities temporarily." "What responsibilities?" "Finances," Jason answered quickly. "Bills, appointments, important paperwork." "No." The word came out sharper than I intended. Jason's face hardened for half a second. Then the fake patience returned. "Mom, you're reacting emotionally again." There it was. Anything I said that challenged him became proof against me. I suddenly understood the terrifying brilliance of what he was doing. If I stayed silent, he controlled the story. If I fought back, he called me unstable. Either way, he won. Amanda stood and walked toward the sink slowly. "You know," she said gently, "sometimes older people don't realize when they need support." Older people. Not Noelle, not Mom. Just older people. Like I had already become a category instead of a person. Jason pulled a folder from his briefcase. "I've actually been researching some legal protections." Every nerve in my body tightened. "What kind of protections?" He opened the folder calmly. At the top of one document, I saw the word guardianship. My blood ran cold. Jason noticed my expression immediately. "It's only precautionary," he said quickly. "In case things get worse." Things get worse. Like my future had already been decided. I looked down at the papers again. Legal forms, notes, printed information, prepared in advance. This wasn't concern anymore. This was planning, careful, organized planning. And suddenly, Dr. Keller's question echoed loudly in my mind. "Are you comfortable at home for the first time since Harold died?" I wasn't sure I was safe in my own house anymore. That night, after Jason and Amanda finally left, I locked every door in the house twice. Not because I thought someone would break in, but because, for the first time in my life, fear had followed me into my own home. I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the folder Jason had accidentally left behind. At least, I assumed it was accidental. Part of me wondered if he wanted me to see it, wanted me scared. The word guardianship sat at the top of the papers like a threat. I had heard of guardianship cases before, usually involving severe dementia, mental illness, or elderly people unable to care for themselves. Once a court granted someone guardianship, that person could control nearly everything. money, medical decisions, property, freedom. I opened my laptop with shaking hands and began reading. The deeper I searched, the colder I felt. If Jason convinced a judge I was mentally incompetent, I could lose control over every part of my life. And suddenly, so many things started making sense. The constant corrections, the comments in front of family, the doctor appointment, the subtle humiliation. He wasn't just embarrassing me. He was documenting me, building a narrative. I barely slept that night. Around 3 a.m, I walked downstairs for water and noticed something strange through the front window. Jason's car, parked across the street. My pulse jumped. I stood frozen behind the curtains. Why was he there? The engine was off, the headlights dark. He just sat there, watching the house. After several minutes, he finally drove away. I didn't sleep at all after that. The next morning, I tried logging into my online banking account. My password didn't work. I frowned and tried again, carefully. Still wrong. After the third failed attempt, I called the bank. The representative asked several security questions before finally saying, "It looks like the password was changed yesterday afternoon." A chill ran through me. I didn't change it. There was a pause. "Well, someone using your authorized device did." Authorized device? Jason had set up online access months earlier when he claimed he was helping me organize things. My hands started trembling. "Can you tell me when exactly it was changed?" The woman hesitated. "Yesterday at 2:14 p.m. That was while I'd been at Dr. Keller's office, while Jason had possession of my phone." I thanked her quietly and hung up. For several seconds, I just sat there staring at nothing. Then the anger came. Real anger. Not confusion. Not fear. Anger. I drove to the bank immediately. The manager helped me secure the account and reset all passwords. I didn't mention Jason directly. Not yet, because saying it out loud somehow made it real. When I returned home, Jason's SUV was already parked in my driveway. My stomach tightened instantly. He walked out onto the porch before I even reached the steps. "Where were you?" The question sounded less like concern and more like control. At the bank. His expression flickered for a split second. Then he smiled. "You should have told me. I could have taken you. I'm perfectly capable of driving myself." Jason sighed heavily. There's no need to get defensive. Defensive? Another word he loved using. I stepped past him and unlocked the front door. Jason followed me inside immediately. "You changed the banking passwords," I said flatly. He froze, then slowly shook his head. "No, Mom. You probably forgot doing it." There was the lie. Smooth, instant, practiced. "I spoke to the bank," I said quietly. Jason crossed his arms. "I've been helping manage your accounts for months. Helping doesn't mean changing my passwords without permission." "You're overreacting." "No," I snapped. "You're crossing boundaries." For one brief second, something ugly flashed across his face. Gone almost instantly. But I saw it. Resentment. Amanda walked in behind him carrying coffee cups. She stopped immediately when she sensed tension. "What's going on?" Jason rubbed his forehead dramatically. "She thinks I'm trying to steal from her." Amanda looked wounded. "Noelle, after everything Jason's doing for you." The performance almost impressed me. Almost. I never said steal. Jason laughed bitterly. "That's clearly what you're implying." I stared at my son. This man had once cried in my arms after his first heartbreak at 16. I used to cut the crusts off his sandwiches. I worked extra shifts to help pay for college when Harold got laid off. And now he was standing in my kitchen gaslighting me with a straight face. Amanda set the coffees down slowly. "You've been very emotional lately," she said carefully. "I'm emotional because my son is treating me like I'm incompetent." Jason suddenly pulled several papers from his briefcase. "I didn't want to do this yet." My stomach dropped. "What is that?" "Just notes." He handed them toward me. I took the pages slowly, typed dates, descriptions, observations, examples of confusion, missed appointments, repeated stories, mood swings. I looked up in horror. "You're documenting me." Jason softened his expression immediately. "Mom, this is for your protection." "No," I whispered. "This is for court." Silence filled the room. Amanda looked away first. "That told me everything." Jason stepped closer. "You're spiraling right now. I'm reacting like a sane person because my son is secretly building a legal case against me. You see?" he said quietly to Amanda. "Paranoia." The word hit me like a slap. Paranoia. My chest tightened so hard I struggled to breathe. Because suddenly I realized how impossible this situation was becoming. Anything I said became evidence. Any anger became instability. Any fear became paranoia. Jason walked toward me slowly, like someone approaching a frightened animal. "I know this is hard," he said gently, "but you need help. No, you can't manage everything alone anymore." I said no. His jaw tightened slightly. Then came the sentence that truly terrified me. "You may not get a choice eventually." The room went silent. Amanda looked uncomfortable immediately. Even she seemed startled he'd said it out loud. I stared at my son, at this stranger wearing my child's face. Then suddenly, his phone rang. Jason glanced at the screen quickly. "I need to take this." He walked toward the back patio and slid the glass door shut behind him. Amanda busied herself nervously wiping an already clean counter. I stood completely still. Then without thinking, I moved closer to the patio door. Jason's voice carried faintly through the glass. "I know the process takes time." A pause. "No, she's resisting more now." Another pause, then the sentence that made my blood run cold. "If the guardianship goes through, we can liquidate the house within 60 days. Liquidate the house. My house. The home Harold built with his own hands. I pressed one trembling hand against the wall for support. Jason lowered his voice after that, but I caught fragments. Assets. Medical authority. Unsafe alone. When he came back inside, I quickly stepped away from the door. Jason looked calmer now. Resolved, like the conversation had reassured him. "I'm going to handle dinner tonight," Amanda said quickly, clearly, trying to ease tension. But I barely heard her, because one horrifying truth kept echoing through my mind. This was never about protecting me. It was about taking everything before I could stop them. And for the first time, I realized I needed proof. Real proof. Not just instincts. Not just fear. Because nobody was going to believe an old woman accusing her own son without evidence. Especially after Jason had spent months convincing everyone I was losing my mind. The next morning, I drove to an electronics store across town. I parked near the back of the lot and sat in the car for almost 10 minutes before going inside. Part of me still felt ridiculous. I was 68 years old buying recording devices like someone in a crime movie. Another part of me felt sick with guilt, because no matter what Jason had done, he was still my son. I kept hearing his little boy voice in my head. "Mom, watch this. Mom, can you help me? Mom, don't leave yet." There is no pain quite like realizing the child you once protected has become the person you need protection from. Inside the store, a young employee showed me several small digital voice recorders. This one has good battery life, he explained cheerfully. People use them for interviews mostly. Interviews. If only he knew. I bought 3. On the drive home, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my fingers hurt. I kept asking myself the same question. What if I'm wrong? What if grief and stress really are making me paranoid? But then I remembered Jason's voice on the patio. Liquidate the house within 60 days. No, I wasn't imagining this anymore. When I got home, Jason's SUV wasn't there for once. I moved quickly. One recorder went behind cookbooks on the kitchen shelf, another under the side table in the living room. The third I kept in my sweater pocket. By the time I finished, my heart was racing so hard I had to sit down. I suddenly understood why people trapped in abusive situations often stay silent. Because living in constant suspicion exhausts you. Every sound makes you tense. Every conversation feels dangerous. Around 5 o'clock, Jason and Amanda arrived unexpectedly. Again. Lately, they came over almost daily without asking first. Amanda entered carrying grocery bags. "We brought dinner," she announced brightly. Jason studied my face carefully. "You okay? I'm tired." He nodded slowly. "You've seemed very anxious lately." There it was again. Every emotion I showed became evidence. Amanda started unpacking food, while Jason wandered casually through the house. Too casually. I watched him glance toward my office desk, then toward the hallway closet where I kept financial documents. Searching. That's what he was doing. Searching. "Where's Lily?" I asked, mostly to break the silence. "At a friend's house," Amanda answered. Jason sat across from me at the kitchen table. "You know," he said gently, "none of this has to become difficult." I stayed quiet. "We're trying to help you transition safely." Transition, like I was slowly disappearing already. "I'm not giving you control of my life," I said flatly. Jason sighed deeply. This stubbornness is exactly what worries me. I felt anger rise instantly, but forced myself to stay calm. Because now every word mattered, every reaction mattered. The recorder hidden behind the cookbooks captured everything. "I've managed my own life perfectly fine for decades," I replied carefully. "You forgot your medication twice last week." "No, I didn't." Jason leaned back slowly. "Mom, lying about memory problems is common." Lying. He said it so naturally, like he had already rewritten reality in his own mind. Amanda suddenly joined the conversation. Maybe assisted living wouldn't be so bad. The words hit me like ice water. "What, it's just something to consider eventually," she said softly. "A place with supervision." Supervision. I stared at her in disbelief. This woman was discussing removing me from my home while standing in my kitchen eating my food. Jason rubbed his temples dramatically. "We're under a lot of stress too, Mom." Something inside me almost snapped then. Stress. They were trying to take my freedom. But I swallowed the anger. Because I finally understood the game. If I exploded emotionally, they would use it later. So instead, I stood calmly and began pouring iced tea into glasses. That's when Jason made a mistake. He thought I was beaten already. "You know," he said casually once we get everything settled, "this house could actually sell pretty fast." I froze. Amanda shot him a quick warning look. Too late. I turned slowly. Sell. Jason recovered instantly. "I just mean eventually, down the road. This house is not for sale." He gave me that fake patient smile again. "We'll see what the court recommends." The court. He finally admitted it openly. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Amanda forced a nervous laugh. Jason's just thinking ahead. But the damage was done. That night after dinner, Jason stayed behind, while Amanda supposedly went to pick up Lily. I sat in the living room pretending to read while he paced near the hallway. Then his phone rang. He answered quietly, thinking I couldn't hear. "Yeah," he muttered. "She's resisting harder now." A pause. "No, she still doesn't know how far along the paperwork is." "Paperwork?" My stomach twisted. Jason lowered his voice further and walked toward the kitchen. I stood carefully and moved closer without making noise. "Power of attorney first," he whispered. "Guardianship if necessary." Another pause. "No, she's still mentally sharp enough to fight it. Sharp enough to fight it." There it was. Proof. My pulse hammered so loudly I thought he might hear it. Then came the sentence that changed everything. "But once the judge starts seeing the documentation, nobody's going to believe her." Nobody's going to believe her. I suddenly understood the full horror of what Jason had been building. Not just a legal case, a reputation, a public identity. He was turning me into the confused old woman before I even had the chance to defend myself. And once people accept that version of you, every denial becomes proof. Jason stepped back into the living room, smiling casually. "Everything okay?" I looked directly at him. My own son. A man I no longer recognized. "Yes," I answered softly. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was the one hiding something. The recorder in my pocket captured every word. Later that night, after they finally left, I locked myself in my bedroom and listened to the recordings. Hearing Jason's voice through headphones made it even worse somehow. Cold, calculated, clinical, not emotional at all. No grieving son, no worried caretaker, just strategy. At one point, Amanda's voice came through clearly from earlier in the evening. "This whole thing makes me nervous," she whispered. Jason answered immediately. "Nobody believes old women once dementia gets mentioned." I stopped breathing for a second. Then Amanda asked quietly, "What if Lily figures it out?" Jason laughed softly. "She's 17. She'll believe whatever we tell her." I pulled the headphones off slowly. Tears burned my eyes. Not because I was weak, not because I was scared. Because the truth finally became undeniable. Jason wasn't trying to help me. He wasn't confused. He wasn't overwhelmed. My son was deliberately destroying my credibility so he could take control of my money, my home, and eventually my entire life. And now, I finally had proof. A week later, Jason announced he was hosting another family dinner. The moment he called to invite me, I knew something was wrong. Jason hated organizing family events. Even holidays usually became Amanda's responsibility, while he disappeared to take work calls during cleanup. But suddenly, within a month, he wanted everyone together twice. Too often. Too deliberate. "It'll be good for you," he said over the phone. "You've been isolating yourself." I almost laughed at the hypocrisy. He and Amanda had slowly pushed people away from me for months while pretending to worry about my loneliness. Still, I agreed to go. Because by then, I understood something important. Jason felt confident, and confident people make mistakes. Before leaving the house that evening, I checked the recorder in my purse 3 separate times. Battery full, storage empty, ready. I stared at myself in the hallway mirror before walking out. For the first time in weeks, I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. The stress had aged me quickly. Dark circles under my eyes, tension in my jaw, fear hiding underneath exhaustion. But there was something else there too now. Awareness. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't imagining things, and that changed everything. Jason and Amanda's house glowed warmly against the cold Ohio evening when I arrived. Cars already lined the driveway and curb outside. Too many people. Jason wanted witnesses tonight. The second I walked inside, Amanda appeared with her usual polished smile. "Noelle," she said sweetly while air-kissing my cheek. "You look tired." I forced myself to smile calmly. "Long week." She tilted her head sympathetically. "You should really be resting more." There was always an audience nearby when she said things like that. Always. I noticed my cousin Ellen standing close enough to overhear. Amanda noticed her too. That was intentional. The house buzzed with conversation and laughter, but beneath it all, tension crawled quietly under my skin. Jason approached, carrying drinks. "Mom," he said warmly, loud enough for nearby relatives to hear. "Did you remember to take your medication today?" Several heads turned subtly toward us. I looked directly at him. "Yes?" Jason nodded slowly. "Good. Last time you forgot, you got really emotional." Lie. Completely fabricated. But he said it so naturally, like he'd rehearsed it. I took the glass from his hand carefully and walked away before anger showed on my face. The recorder inside my purse captured everything. Dinner started about 30 minutes later. Amanda had arranged everyone carefully around the long dining table. I noticed immediately that she placed me directly in the center, exposed from every angle, like the guest of honor at my own humiliation. For the first half hour, everything stayed relatively normal. Then Jason began steering the conversation exactly where he wanted it. So he said casually while cutting his steak, "Mom got confused at the grocery store again last week." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I did not. Jason gave a sad little shrug. "You called me because you couldn't find your car. I parked in the wrong section once." Amanda reached over and touched his arm gently. "You've been under so much pressure lately, Jason. Pressure, burden, sacrifice." They were crafting him into the suffering son, caring for his unstable elderly mother. Across the table, my brother Thomas frowned slightly. "That doesn't sound too serious," he said. Jason exhaled heavily, like a man carrying unbearable responsibility. "You don't see what I see." Again with that phrase. Amanda lowered her voice carefully. "She's also been forgetting conversations." "I have not," I snapped. The table went quiet instantly. Jason leaned back slightly. "There," he said softly. That anger again. I realized my mistake immediately. Every emotional reaction became evidence. Every defense became proof. I forced myself to unclench my hands beneath the table. "I'm angry because you keep saying things about me that aren't true." Jason's expression filled with fake heartbreak. "Mom, nobody's attacking you." The cruelty of that sentence nearly took my breath away, because that's exactly what they were doing. But they were doing it politely enough that I looked unreasonable for noticing. Amanda suddenly turned toward my cousin Rachel. "Honestly, we've started discussing assisted living options." The room went silent. My stomach dropped. "You what?" Amanda looked startled by my reaction. "Only because we care about your safety. I'm not going into assisted living." Jason sighed dramatically. "No one's forcing you. Yet." He didn't say the word out loud, but I heard it anyway. Lily had barely spoken all evening. She sat near the end of the table quietly watching everyone, watching her parents, watching me. And for the first time, I noticed something different in her expression. Not concern, suspicion. Jason kept going. "Last month, she forgot to pay the electric bill." Another lie. "I paid it early." Jason shook his head slowly. "I covered it for you, Mom." "No, you didn't." Amanda exchanged a subtle glance with Ellen. The performance was so polished now it almost felt choreographed. Then came the moment that truly humiliated me. My Aunt Denise spoke carefully from across the table. Noelle, have you considered maybe having someone stay with you, Pity? I heard pity in her voice. That hurt more than Jason's lies, because it meant the manipulation was working. Jason lowered his eyes dramatically. We're just trying to avoid a crisis before someone gets hurt. Someone gets hurt? As if I were dangerous now. As if I were becoming some unstable stranger instead of the woman who raised him. I suddenly couldn't breathe properly. The room felt smaller, hotter. I stood abruptly from the table. I need some air. Jason immediately rose too. Mom, sit down. I said I need air. His expression hardened for a split second before softening again for the audience. You're getting overwhelmed. Overwhelmed, fragile, confused, always the same carefully chosen words. I walked quickly toward the back patio while dozens of eyes followed me. Outside, cold air hit my face sharply. I gripped the porch railing tightly and fought to steady my breathing. A few seconds later, the sliding door opened behind me. Lily stepped outside quietly. Neither of us spoke at first. Then she said softly, "Grandma, are you okay?" I turned toward her. And for the first time all night, I saw genuine concern instead of performance. I don't know anymore, I admitted. Lily looked back toward the dining room nervously. My dad's been talking about you a lot lately. What kind of things? She hesitated. That you're getting worse. Worse. Like I had some disease spreading through me. I swallowed hard. Do you believe him? Lily didn't answer immediately. That silence told me more than words could. Then suddenly, the patio door slid open again. Jason stepped outside, smiling too brightly. There you are, he said gently. You scared everybody. I stared at him, at the man pretending concern while publicly dismantling my dignity, piece by piece. Then, Jason turned toward Lily. Why don't you help your mom with dessert? Lily hesitated before going inside. But as she passed me, something unexpected happened. She slipped her father's phone from the patio table into her sweater pocket. So quickly, I almost missed it. Jason didn't notice at all. He stepped closer to me once Lily disappeared inside. You embarrassed yourself tonight, he said quietly. The warmth vanished from his voice instantly now that no one else could hear. I stared at him in disbelief. You humiliated me in front of the family. Jason's jaw tightened. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Then his expression softened again as voices approached from inside. The mask slipped back into place perfectly. And that terrified me more than anything else. Because my son wasn't losing control. He was controlling everything. Except maybe, for the first time, Lily was beginning to see it too. 3 days after the dinner, Lily showed up at my house unannounced. It was raining hard that afternoon. I remember because the sound of water hitting the windows had made the house feel even lonelier than usual. When the doorbell rang, I almost didn't answer. Lately, every unexpected knock filled me with anxiety. But the moment I opened the door and saw Lily standing there in an oversized gray hoodie, soaked from the rain, something inside me softened immediately. Lily. Her eyes looked red, like she'd been crying. Can I come in? She asked quietly. I stepped aside without hesitation. The second she entered the house, she wrapped her arms tightly around herself and looked over her shoulder toward the street. That movement alone told me she was afraid someone might have followed her. I guided her into the kitchen and handed her a towel. What happened? For several seconds, she didn't answer. Then suddenly tears filled her eyes. Grandma, I think my dad's lying. The words hit me harder than I expected, not because I didn't already know, but because hearing someone else say it out loud made the nightmare real in a completely different way. I pulled out a chair slowly. "Sit down." Lily sat across from me at the kitchen table, while rain hammered against the windows. She looked exhausted, 17 years old, and already carrying the kind of emotional weight no child should have to carry. "I took Dad's phone after the dinner," she admitted quietly. My heartbeat quickened instantly. "You what he left it on the patio table." She swallowed hard. "I don't even know why I did it. I think I just wanted to know if I was imagining things." I stayed silent. Lily pulled her phone from her pocket and unlocked it with trembling fingers. I took pictures before I put his phone back. She turned the screen toward me. My stomach dropped. Emails. Dozens of them. Some between Jason and a lawyer. Others between Jason and Amanda. One subject line immediately caught my attention. "Guardianship strategy." I stopped breathing for a second. Lily scrolled downward slowly. I didn't read everything she whispered, but some of it. Her voice cracked. I took the phone carefully. One email from Jason read, "We need stronger examples of confusion before the hearing." Another, "If the doctor won't fully cooperate, we may need statements from family members." My hands started shaking. Statements. They were recruiting relatives, building witnesses, building a case. Lily looked horrified watching me read. "There's more." She opened another screenshot. This time, my chest physically hurt. Jason had written Mom's still functional enough to argue, but once people start expecting dementia symptoms, everything she does looks unstable. I stared at the words until they blurred. Functional enough to argue. Like I wasn't even his mother anymore. Just a legal obstacle. Lily wiped tears from her face angrily. "I confronted Mom about it last night." I looked up sharply. "You did? She told me to stay out of grown-up business. What did your father say?" Lily laughed bitterly through tears. "He said you were sick and didn't understand what was happening." The pain in her voice nearly broke me. Because now Jason wasn't only destroying me. He was poisoning his daughter, too. Lily looked down at her hands. I didn't know who to believe at first. That honesty hurt. But I appreciated it anyway. "Your dad kept saying you were confused, and honestly..." She hesitated. "Sometimes you did seem upset lately." Because I was being manipulated, I whispered, "I know that now." The room fell quiet except for the rain. Then Lily opened one final screenshot, and this one changed everything. An email from Jason to his lawyer. Short, cold, terrifying. "Between us, my mother is not actually senile yet, but she's emotional enough after Dad's death that we can probably push the court toward supervised guardianship." I felt the blood drain from my face. Not actually senile yet. Yet. Like he was simply waiting for time to finish the job. Tears burned my eyes instantly. Not from weakness, from grief. Because no matter how much evidence I gathered, some part of me still kept hoping this was all some misunderstanding. That hope died reading those words. Lily reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "I'm sorry, Grandma." I squeezed her fingers tightly. "This isn't your fault." But deep down, I knew her childhood had just ended. There are moments when innocence disappears permanently. This was one of them. After a while, Lily finally asked the question I'd been dreading. "What are you going to do?" I looked toward the rain-covered windows. "I honestly don't know. You have proof now. Proof doesn't always matter when people already think you're unstable." That silence lingered heavily between us. Then Lily lowered her voice. There's something else. My stomach tightened again. What? She glanced nervously toward the front door before continuing. I heard Dad and Mom arguing last night. What about Dad said the court paperwork is almost ready? Almost ready. I closed my eyes briefly. Lily continued quietly. And Mom asked what happens if you fight back. I looked at her carefully. What did your father say? Lily swallowed hard. He said once the court starts evaluating you, every emotional reaction helps their case. Exactly what I had feared. Jason had created a trap where defending myself became evidence against me. Lily suddenly looked furious. He's turning everything you do against you. I nodded slowly. Yes, and everybody believes him because he acts so calm all the time. That observation startled me, because it was incredibly perceptive. Jason always stayed calm publicly, controlled, reasonable, while I became increasingly emotional under pressure. And people trust calmness, even when it hides cruelty. Lily looked up at me with tears in her eyes again. You're not crazy. Those 4 words almost destroyed me. I covered my mouth as emotion crashed through me unexpectedly, because after months of manipulation, after constant correction and humiliation and gaslighting, part of me had actually started doubting myself. Lily stood and walked around the table to hug me tightly, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely alone. After several minutes, she finally pulled back. There's one more thing. I braced myself. I found out Dad met with a realtor. A realtor. She nodded. He wants to sell the house fast after the guardianship hearing. The house, Harold's workshop, the garden I planted 20 years ago, every Christmas memory, every family birthday. They were already planning my life after removing me from it. Lily looked terrified now. What if they force you out? I stared toward the hallway where framed family photos still hung on the walls. Jason, at age 10, holding a baseball glove. Jason graduating college. Jason dancing with me at his wedding. Sometimes the cruelest people in your life are the ones whose baby pictures you still keep in albums. Then slowly, something inside me hardened. Not rage, clarity. Jason believed I was weak because I was grieving, because I was older, because I trusted him. But he had underestimated one thing. I had finally stopped doubting myself. I looked directly at Lily. Your grandfather always said something important. What, when people start lying about who you are? I said quietly, you fight back with the truth. For the first time since this nightmare began, I finally believed I could. The morning after Lily showed me the screenshots, I called Daniel Brooks. My hands trembled so badly, I nearly dropped the phone twice before he answered. Daniel Brooks speaking. For a second, hearing his voice pulled me backward through time. Daniel had been Harold's attorney for over 20 years. He handled our will, property, paperwork, retirement planning, everything important. More than that, he'd been one of Harold's closest friends. After Harold died, Daniel attended the funeral quietly and stayed near the back of the church the entire time. Before leaving, he hugged me and said, "If you ever need anything, you call me." At the time, I thought he meant legal help. I never imagined I would someday need protection from my own son. "Daniel," I said softly, "it's Noelle Hicks." There was immediate warmth in his voice. "Noelle. How are you holding up?" I almost lied, automatically. "I'm fine. People my age say that even while drowning." Instead, I whispered, "I need help." Silence. Then his tone changed instantly. What happened? I didn't explain everything over the phone. Fear still lingered inside me too deeply for that. "I have evidence," I said carefully, "against Jason." The silence on the other end became much heavier this time. "Come to my office," Daniel said quietly. "Today." 2 hours later, I sat across from him in a quiet office downtown while rain streaked against the windows outside. Daniel looked older than I remembered. More gray hair, more lines around his eyes. But the moment I placed the recorder on his desk and handed him copies of Lily's screenshots, something sharp entered his expression immediately. He read in complete silence for nearly 20 minutes. I watched his face carefully as he scrolled through Jason's emails. Disbelief, anger, concern, then finally something close to heartbreak. "Oh, Jason," he muttered under his breath. Hearing pain in Daniel's voice somehow hurt worse than hearing anger, because it reminded me that Jason hadn't only betrayed me, he'd betrayed the people who once loved him too. Daniel removed his glasses slowly. "How long has this been happening?" "Months." "And you recorded these conversations legally inside your own home?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "That's good. Good." The word sounded strange attached to any part of this nightmare. Daniel leaned back heavily in his chair. "Noelle, this is serious." "I know." "No." His voice sharpened slightly. "I don't think you fully do." A cold feeling settled into my stomach. Daniel folded his hands carefully. "What Jason is attempting could qualify as elder financial abuse, coercive control, and potentially fraud depending on the forged documents." Hearing legal terms attached to my own child made me feel physically ill. I looked down at my hands. I kept wondering if maybe grief was making me paranoid. Daniel's expression softened immediately. "That's exactly what manipulation is designed to do." I closed my eyes briefly. For months, I had been living inside confusion so thick it felt impossible to trust my own instincts. Now, someone else was finally confirming what I already knew deep down. Daniel turned one of the printed screenshots toward me. "This email alone is devastating." I stared at Jason's words again. My mother is not actually senile yet. The yet haunted me most. Like my value as a human being had become temporary. Daniel sighed heavily. "Has he officially filed for guardianship yet? I don't know." "He's close." Daniel tapped another page. "These emails suggest he's already preparing documentation." Fear tightened in my chest again. "What happens if he files first?" Daniel looked directly at me. "Then we fight." Something about the certainty in his voice steadied me slightly. For the first time in weeks, I no longer felt completely defenseless. Daniel stood and walked toward a filing cabinet near the wall. After searching briefly, he removed an old manila folder. "I wasn't sure whether I should ever show you this," he admitted quietly. He returned to the desk and slid the folder toward me. My breath caught instantly. Harold's handwriting. Even after a year, I recognized it immediately. "What is this?" Daniel sat slowly. "About 6 years ago, Harold asked me to add additional protections to certain estate documents." I frowned. Why Daniel hesitated carefully before answering. Because he was worried about Jason. The words hit like ice water. I stared at him in disbelief. "Harold never told me that. He didn't want to hurt you." My chest tightened painfully. Daniel opened the folder carefully. Inside were copies of trust amendments and handwritten notes from Harold. One note immediately caught my attention. "If Jason ever attempts to pressure Noelle financially after my death, make sure she's protected." Tears instantly filled my eyes. I pressed one hand over my mouth. Harold knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Daniel spoke gently. Jason had gambling issues for a while in his 30s. I looked up sharply. What? He hid it pretty well. Harold helped him pay off debt twice. I felt dizzy. Jason always claimed his finances were stable. Successful career, good investments, expensive lifestyle. But suddenly pieces started connecting. The constant pressure about the house, the urgency, the manipulation. Daniel continued quietly. Harold worried Jason cared too much about appearances and money. I stared down at the note again. My husband had tried to protect me even after death, and I never even knew. Daniel pointed toward another section in the file. These amendments make it much harder for anyone to force control over your primary assets without overwhelming medical evidence. A small flicker of hope appeared for the first time in weeks, so Jason can't just take everything. Not easily. I exhaled shakily. Daniel's expression darkened again. But don't underestimate how damaging false incompetency claims can become. That fear returned immediately. Because he was right. Even if I won, eventually Jason had already begun poisoning people's perception of me. Family members, friends, possibly courts. Once society labels older women as confused or unstable people, stop listening carefully. Daniel seemed to read my thoughts. You know what your biggest advantage is right now? What you kept evidence instead of reacting emotionally. I almost laughed bitterly. If I reacted emotionally, Jason used it against me. Exactly. Daniel leaned forward slightly. That means he underestimated you. For the first time since arriving, anger flickered through me stronger than grief. Jason truly believed I would collapse quietly, that I would become frightened and obedient, that I would surrender. Daniel began organizing the recordings and screenshots carefully into separate folders. We need to document everything from this point forward, he said. Everything. Phone calls, visits, financial changes, witnesses, any threats. Threats. The word made my stomach twist. Because deep down, I realized something terrible. Jason wasn't going to stop willingly. Daniel suddenly looked at me very carefully. There's one more thing you need to prepare yourself for. Fear returned instantly. What when people like Jason realize they're losing control? Daniel said quietly. Their behavior often escalates. The room felt colder suddenly. I thought about the way Jason watched me now, the way he corrected me constantly, the pressure, the rehearsed concern, and beneath all of it, the anger. Daniel closed the folder gently. You need to be very careful now, Noelle. I nodded slowly. Then my eyes drifted again toward Harold's handwritten note. My husband had seen danger years before I ever did. And somehow, that realization broke my heart all over again. After meeting with Daniel, I stopped reacting the way Jason expected me to. That confused him immediately. For months, he had carefully trained the situation to work a certain way. He provoked me. I became emotional. Then he used my emotions as proof that I was unstable. But now, I understood the pattern. And once you recognize manipulation clearly, something changes inside you. You stop performing fear for the person trying to control you. That shift unsettled Jason more than I expected. 2 days after my meeting with Daniel, he showed up at the house carrying grocery bags and wearing that familiar expression of exhausted concern. But the moment I opened the door, I saw something else underneath it: impatience. How are you feeling today? He asked carefully. Fine. He studied my face for several seconds, like he was searching for cracks. You sound calmer. I slept well. Another long pause. Jason clearly didn't know what to do with a version of me that wasn't frightened or defensive. He followed me into the kitchen while Amanda unloaded groceries dramatically. "We brought soup," she announced. "You barely eat enough lately." I thanked her politely and started putting dishes away. Silence stretched awkwardly through the room. Then Jason finally made his move. "I think we should talk about finances again." There it was, always back to control. I kept my voice calm. "There's nothing to discuss." Jason leaned against the counter. "Mom, this isn't sustainable anymore. What isn't you trying to manage everything alone?" I almost smiled, because now I could hear the script underneath every sentence. Pressure, dependence, incompetence. I placed a plate carefully into the cabinet. "I met with Daniel Brooks yesterday. The effect was immediate." Jason froze. Amanda stopped unpacking groceries entirely. The air in the kitchen changed. "Why?" Jason asked too quickly. I turned calmly, because Harold trusted him. Jason's jaw tightened almost invisibly. "You didn't tell me. I don't need permission to speak with an attorney." Amanda forced a small laugh. "Nobody said you did." But fear flickered briefly across her face. Good. For once, they weren't the only ones controlling the conversation. Jason stepped closer. "What exactly did you discuss?" I looked directly at him. "My legal rights." Silence. Heavy. Dangerous. Jason recovered first. "You think this is some kind of attack? I think my son has been secretly preparing guardianship paperwork?" Amanda immediately jumped in. "That's not fair." I ignored her completely. Jason's voice softened into fake disappointment. "You're being manipulated by people who don't understand the situation." Interesting. Not denying it. Just redirecting it. I folded a dish towel slowly while the recorder hidden beneath the fruit bowl captured every word. "You changed my banking passwords to protect you. You documented false claims about my mental state because I'm worried. You discussed selling my house." Jason suddenly snapped. "We're trying to stop you from ruining your own life?" The outburst shocked all three of us, because Jason almost never lost control. Amanda stared at him immediately. I stayed very still. Then slowly, Jason exhaled and forced calmness back into his voice. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "This is just stressful." There it was again. Stress. Everything always happened to Jason. Never because of Jason. I walked toward the sink slowly. "I'm not signing anything." Jason rubbed his forehead. "You haven't even looked at the papers yet." "What papers?" Amanda glanced nervously toward him. Too late. Jason pulled a folder from his briefcase. My stomach tightened instantly. He placed several documents carefully on the kitchen table. "Temporary financial authority," he explained. "Just in case of emergencies." I didn't touch them. Instead, I looked directly at him. "You forged my signature once already." The silence that followed felt explosive. Amanda's face drained of color instantly. Jason stared at me, then laughed once in disbelief. "Wow. You heard me? Now you're accusing me of fraud." I said nothing. Jason's voice became colder than I'd ever heard it before. "This is exactly why people are concerned about your mental state." The cruelty of that sentence nearly took my breath away. Because it wasn't said in anger, it was calculated, precise, weaponized. Amanda suddenly spoke quietly. "Maybe we should slow down." Jason shot her a sharp look immediately. A real one this time. Not the polite mask. Fear flickered across Amanda's face for a split second before disappearing. Interesting? Maybe Daniel was right. Maybe the pressure was starting to crack them too. Jason picked up the papers and shoved them back into the folder aggressively. "You're making a huge mistake." "No," I answered softly. "You did." Something dangerous flashed across his expression then. not frustration. Hatred. Pure, sudden hatred. And for one horrifying second, I saw exactly how far he might be willing to go if cornered. Then the mask returned. "You're confused right now," he said calmly. I almost admired how quickly he could switch personalities. "I'm clearer than I've been in months." Jason's eyes narrowed slightly. That answer bothered him. "Good." Then suddenly, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and stepped toward the hallway to answer privately. The moment he disappeared, Amanda moved closer to me quickly. "You need to stop fighting him," she whispered. I stared at her in disbelief. "Excuse me, you don't understand how stressed he is." I almost laughed. "He's trying to steal my life." Amanda's eyes filled briefly with something unexpected. Guilt. "He thinks he deserves this house." The honesty stunned me. "Why? Because he thinks Harold loved you more than him." The words hit me harder than I expected. For a second, I remembered Jason at 14, after Harold missed one of his baseball games because of overtime shifts. He'd barely spoken to his father for days afterward. Had that resentment really stayed buried all these years? Amanda lowered her voice further. Things got worse after Jason lost money. How much she hesitated? A lot. Fear moved through me slowly now. Because desperate people become dangerous people. Then Jason returned. Amanda instantly stepped away from me like nothing had happened, but I noticed the tension in her shoulders. Jason noticed it too. "What were you talking about?" "Nothing," Amanda answered quickly. He looked unconvinced. The room suddenly felt suffocating. Jason stared at me for several long seconds. Then finally, he spoke. "You know something?" I stayed silent. "You've changed." I almost answered truthfully. "No." I finally woke up, but instead I simply said, "People tend to change when they realize they're being lied to." Jason's face hardened again. Then slowly, he smiled. And somehow that smile frightened me more than the anger. "Okay," he said quietly. "If that's how you want this to go." A cold feeling settled deep into my stomach. Because for the first time since this began, Jason sounded less like a son trying to manipulate his mother and more like an opponent preparing for war. 3 mornings later, Jason arrived at my house before 9 o'clock. I knew something was wrong immediately. He was too cheerful. Manipulative people often become strangely upbeat when they think they're finally close to winning. "Get your coat," he said casually after stepping inside. "We need to stop by the bank." I frowned. "Why, there's an issue with one of your accounts." My stomach tightened instantly. "What kind of issue?" Jason shrugged. "Probably nothing serious. Fraud protection or something." Lie. I could hear it immediately now. Once you stop trusting someone, their lies become louder than their words. "I can handle it myself." Jason's smile never moved. The bank already called me. How would they call you? We're both listed as contacts. That alone irritated me. I had never authorized Jason to become the primary contact for anything. Still, I forced myself to stay calm. The recorder inside my purse was already running. Daniel's voice echoed in my mind constantly now. Document everything. So I did. Every conversation, every manipulation, every threat disguised as concern. The drive to the bank felt painfully tense. Jason kept trying to make small talk while I stared out the passenger window, pretending calmness I didn't actually feel. Then suddenly he sighed dramatically. "You know this could all be so much easier." I turned slowly. What could if you stopped fighting us? Us. Not helping me? Controlling me? I said nothing. Jason gripped the steering wheel tighter. "You've made everybody worried." No, I answered quietly. You made everybody worried? His jaw flexed. For several seconds, silence filled the car. Then Jason spoke again, softer this time. You're not thinking clearly anymore. The strange thing was, hearing those words no longer hurt the same way. Because now I understood their purpose. Gaslighting only works when you still trust the person speaking. That trust was gone. When we arrived at the bank, Jason moved quickly. Too quickly. Like he already knew exactly where we were going. Inside the building smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. A young teller smiled politely as we approached. Good morning? Jason answered before I could speak. We're here to update authority access on my mother's accounts. My pulse jumped immediately. The teller nodded. Do you have the paperwork? Jason pulled a folder from his briefcase. Of course he did. Prepared, organized, planned. The teller glanced through the documents before looking toward me politely. Mrs. Hicks will just need your signatures here and here. She slid the papers across the desk. I looked down slowly. Financial authorization forms, expanded access permissions, partial control transfers. Jason spoke gently beside me. It's just temporary support. Temporary, like every trap starts. I didn't touch the pen. Instead, I read carefully. That annoyed him immediately. Mom, we already discussed this. No, I answered calmly. You informed me. That's different. The teller glanced between us awkwardly. Jason forced a patient smile. She gets overwhelmed with financial documents lately. There it was again. Always performing for an audience. I looked directly at the teller. I was an accounting manager for nearly 30 years. The young woman blinked. Oh. Jason chuckled softly. She forgets things sometimes. I forget nothing about contracts. The tension sharpened instantly. Jason leaned closer toward me. You're making a scene. No, I said quietly. You are. The teller suddenly looked uncomfortable. I can give you both a few minutes if needed. Jason exhaled heavily. No, it's fine. But it wasn't fine, because for the first time publicly, I was refusing him directly, and he hated it. I turned another page slowly. Then I froze. One section granted authority to initiate property-related financial actions. Property. My chest tightened. This includes housing authority. Jason's expression changed immediately. It's standard language. No, it isn't. Mom, you're trying to gain control over my house. The teller looked up sharply now. Jason's calmness cracked slightly. Would you stop saying it like that? How else should I say it? Jason's voice lowered dangerously. You're confused. I looked directly at him. No, you're desperate. For one brief second, pure rage flashed across his face. Real rage, not the polished performance. The teller noticed it too. I saw her posture stiffen immediately. Jason caught himself quickly and forced another smile. Sorry, he muttered. This has been emotionally exhausting. Emotionally exhausting. Always the victim. I slowly pushed the paperwork back across the desk. I'm not signing anything. Silence. The teller cleared her throat carefully. That's completely your choice, Mrs. Hicks. Jason turned toward her instantly. She's under a lot of stress lately. The teller's expression remained polite but cautious now. I understand, but I could tell she was watching him differently. Good. Jason leaned closer to me again. You don't even understand what happens if your condition gets worse. My condition? You know exactly what I mean. No, I said steadily. I know exactly what you mean. His breathing became heavier. People nearby had started glancing over quietly now. Jason noticed too. And losing public control terrified him. "Mom!" he whispered sharply, "Sign the papers." That whisper frightened me more than shouting would have. Because underneath it was panic. Real panic. I sat very still. "No." Jason's mask finally slipped completely. "You are being unbelievably selfish right now." The words exploded louder than he intended. Several heads turned fully now. The teller blinked in shock. I stared at my son. Selfish, for refusing to surrender my life. Jason rubbed both hands over his face aggressively. "I'm trying to protect you." "No," I answered softly. "You're trying to control me." That did it. Jason slammed one hand against the counter hard enough to make the teller jump. "You have no idea how much pressure I'm under." The entire lobby went silent. For one terrible second, nobody moved. Then the teller spoke carefully. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to lower your voice." Jason looked around suddenly like he'd only just realized people were staring. His breathing sounded uneven now. Amanda usually helped maintain his image in public. Without her there, the cracks showed faster. I stood slowly from the chair. "I'm leaving." Jason grabbed my wrist instantly. Not hard enough to injure me, but hard enough to stop me. The teller stood immediately. "Sir." Jason released me quickly, but it was too late. The damage was done. A middle-aged bank employee near the offices had already started walking toward us. "Is there a problem here?" Jason immediately switched back into performance mode. "No problem," he said quickly. "My mother's just confused and upset." Confused, even now. Always the same script. But this time, something changed. The employee looked at me carefully, then at Jason, then at my wrist. And suddenly, I saw doubt enter someone else's eyes for the first time. Real doubt. Not about me. About him. The employee turned politely toward me. "Mrs. Hicks, would you like to step into my office for a moment?" Jason answered before I could. "She's fine." The employee ignored him completely. I asked Mrs. Hicks. That tiny shift in power changed everything. I looked directly at Jason, then calmly answered, "Yes." I would, and for the very first time since this nightmare began, someone besides Lily had finally started seeing the truth. The guardianship hearing was scheduled 3 weeks later. 3 weeks. That was all the time Jason needed to try turning me from a mother into a legal case. By then, nearly everyone in the family knew about the hearing, and somehow Jason controlled the story before I even entered the courtroom. He's just trying to help her. She's been struggling lately. It's sad, really. That was the most painful part. Not strangers believing him. Family. People who had eaten at my table for decades. People who watched me raise Jason. People who once trusted me completely. Now they looked at me carefully whenever I spoke, searching for signs of confusion, the same way people inspect cracked glass, waiting for it to shatter. The morning of the hearing, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, buttoning a navy blue blouse with trembling hands. Not because I doubted myself anymore, because I understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't only about money now. It was about identity. About whether I would still legally belong to myself by the end of the day. Daniel arrived at my house at 8 sharp. "You ready?" he asked gently. "No." But I nodded anyway. The courthouse in downtown Columbus looked colder than usual that morning. Gray skies hung low over the city, and reporters lingered near the entrance covering unrelated cases. Still, when Jason saw me arrive with Daniel, something shifted visibly in his expression. Until then, he had probably imagined I would come alone. Weak, frightened, easy to overwhelm. Instead, I walked beside an attorney carrying organized evidence. That unsettled him immediately. Amanda stood near the courthouse doors, wearing a cream-colored blazer, and carefully arranged sadness on her face. The performance almost impressed me. Almost. "Oh, Noelle," she said softly when we approached. "You don't have to make this harder." Daniel stepped between us smoothly. "My client won't be discussing the case outside the courtroom." Amanda's expression tightened. Client, not confused old woman, not unstable mother. Client. Jason approached a moment later, holding a folder against his chest. For several seconds, we simply stared at each other. Then he sighed dramatically. "You still have time to settle this privately." I looked directly into his eyes. "You mean surrender quietly?" His jaw tightened. Daniel guided me toward the courtroom before Jason could respond. Inside the room felt painfully formal. Wood-paneled walls, muted voices, rows of benches already partially filled with observers and relatives. I noticed my brother Thomas sitting near the back beside Aunt Denise. Neither would fully meet my eyes. Humiliation burned deep in my chest, because part of me still couldn't believe this was happening. I had packed Jason's school lunches, nursed him through fevers, held him after heartbreaks. And now we were preparing to face each other in court like enemies. The hearing began at 9:30. Judge Eleanor Whitmore entered briskly, sharp-eyed and composed. Jason's attorney, a tall man named Richard Coleman, immediately projected calm professionalism. Everything about Jason's legal strategy relied on appearances. Reasonable son, concerned family, emotionally unstable elderly woman. Richard began smoothly. "Your Honor, my client's only concern is the safety and well-being of his mother, Mrs. Noelle Hicks. Safety, concern, protection, always the same words." He continued, carefully presenting Jason as a burdened caretaker overwhelmed by a declining parent. "She has demonstrated increasing memory issues, emotional instability, confusion regarding finances, and resistance to necessary support." Every sentence felt like someone erasing pieces of me publicly. Then came the part that truly hurt. Jason took the stand, and he cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough moisture in his eyes to appear sincere. "I love my mother," he said softly. "This has been the hardest decision of my life." I almost stopped breathing, because if you didn't know the truth, he sounded believable. That terrified me. Jason described missed appointments, confusion, mood swings, every tiny human mistake exaggerated into evidence of decline. He even mentioned Harold's death repeatedly. "She hasn't been the same since Dad passed." That part was true. Grief changes people, but grief is not incompetence. Still, hearing my pain weaponized against me felt unbearable. Richard then called Amanda. She dabbed carefully at tears while describing my supposed forgetfulness. "She gets defensive very quickly," Amanda whispered emotionally. "Sometimes she becomes paranoid and accuses Jason of trying to control her." Paranoid. I closed my eyes briefly. Daniel leaned toward me quietly. "Stay calm." I nodded, but rage burned inside me so intensely my hands shook. Because this wasn't misunderstanding anymore. This was performance. Coordinated. Prepared. Cruel. Then Richard presented copies of Jason's documentation. Pages and pages of observations, behavior notes, claims, descriptions carefully designed to make me appear unstable. The judge reviewed them quietly, and for one terrifying moment, I saw concern in her eyes. Fear crawled through my chest instantly. What if it worked? What if all of this actually worked? Richard turned toward the judge again. "Your Honor, my client simply wants temporary guardianship authority to protect his mother's finances and medical well-being before her condition worsens." condition worsens, like I was disappearing in real time. Then, finally, Daniel stood. Everything about the room shifted the moment he began speaking. Unlike Richard's polished emotional manipulation, Daniel sounded calm and precise. Your Honor, what we have here is not a concerned son protecting an impaired mother. He paused. It is a financially desperate man attempting to manufacture incompetence. The courtroom went completely silent. Jason's face hardened immediately. Daniel continued. My client spent 30 years managing multi-million-dollar public education budgets without a single ethical complaint. He placed documents before the judge. Her physician has not diagnosed dementia incapacity or cognitive impairment. Jason shifted uncomfortably. For the first time all morning, uncertainty flickered across his face. Daniel turned another page carefully. We also have evidence suggesting financial coercion, deceptive manipulation, and deliberate attempts to isolate Mrs. Hicks socially. Richard immediately stood. Objection. Daniel didn't even look at him. We have recordings. The room froze, completely, utterly. Jason's entire body went still. Amanda looked like the blood had drained from her face. Even Richard blinked in visible surprise. Judge Whitmore lowered her glasses slightly. Recordings? Daniel nodded calmly. Yes, Your Honor. I watched Jason carefully then, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine fear. Not irritation, not frustration. Fear. Because suddenly he realized something terrifying. I had not come to court weak. I had come prepared. Daniel lifted a small digital recorder from his briefcase and placed it gently on the table. Jason stared at it like it might explode, and deep down, I think part of him already knew his entire performance was about to collapse. The courtroom became so quiet, I could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Judge Whitmore looked from Daniel to the recorder sitting on the table. Proceed, she said carefully. Daniel nodded once, then he pressed play. At first, only static filled the room. Then Jason's voice emerged clearly through the speakers. Once the guardianship goes through, we can liquidate the house within 60 days. Every muscle in Jason's body tightened instantly. Amanda's face lost all color. A ripple moved through the courtroom benches behind us. I heard someone whisper, "Oh my God." Daniel let the recording continue. Amanda's voice came next. This whole thing makes me nervous. Then Jason answered calmly, "Nobody believes old women once dementia gets mentioned." The reaction inside the courtroom shifted immediately. Not dramatically, not loudly, but visibly. The atmosphere changed. People stopped looking at me with pity and started looking at Jason with suspicion. Richard Coleman stood quickly. Your Honor, we object to selective recordings taken out of context. Daniel cut him off immediately. We have hours of recordings, Your Honor. The context only gets worse. Judge Whitmore's expression hardened. Sit down, Mr. Coleman. Richard slowly sat. Jason stared straight ahead now, jaw locked tight. The mask was slipping. Daniel pressed play again. Jason's voice filled the room once more. She's still mentally sharp enough to fight it. Another pause. But once the judge starts seeing the documentation, nobody's going to believe her. A woman somewhere behind me gasped softly. My chest tightened painfully. Not because I hadn't heard the recordings before, because now everyone else had. Now they finally heard what I'd been living through. Daniel paused the recording. Would you like me to continue? Your Honor, Judge. Whitmore nodded slowly. Yes. Daniel pressed play again. This time, the recording from my kitchen surfaced. "You have no idea how much pressure I'm under." Then my own voice answered calmly. "You're trying to control me." The next sound echoed brutally through the courtroom, Jason slamming his hand against the bank counter. Several people visibly flinched. Then the bank employee's voice entered the recording. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to lower your voice." Daniel stopped the audio again. "Your Honor, we also have testimony from bank personnel regarding Mr. Hicks's aggressive attempts to pressure Mrs. Hicks into transferring financial authority." Jason finally exploded. "This is ridiculous." Every head turned instantly toward him. Richard grabbed his arm quickly. "Jason, she manipulated those recordings." His voice cracked loudly across the courtroom. Judge Whitmore's eyes narrowed immediately. "Mr. Hicks, control yourself." For one terrifying second, I thought Jason might actually lose composure completely. And in a way, he already had. Because manipulation only works while the manipulator appears calm. Once anger surfaces publicly, the illusion cracks. Daniel remained perfectly composed. "We also have email evidence." Lily stood slowly from the back row. Jason froze. The entire room did. I watched confusion flood his face first, then betrayal. "Lily," he whispered. My granddaughter looked terrified, but she walked toward the witness stand anyway. 17 years old, shaking hands, tearful eyes, and still braver than most adults in that room. Amanda immediately started crying softly. Real tears this time, not performance. Fear. The judge addressed Lily gently. "You understand you're under oath?" "Yes, ma'am." Her voice trembled badly. Richard looked deeply uncomfortable now. "Because nobody expects the manipulator's own child to testify against him." Daniel approached Lily carefully. "Can you explain how you obtained the emails submitted into evidence?" Lily swallowed hard. "I took pictures of my dad's phone." Jason closed his eyes briefly. The shame on his face lasted only a second, before anger replaced it again. Daniel continued gently. "Why did you do that?" Lily looked directly toward me. "Because my grandma kept saying something was wrong, and everybody acted like she was crazy." Crazy. Hearing that word nearly broke me. Lily's voice cracked. I didn't know who to believe at first. Jason stared at his daughter in complete disbelief now, like he genuinely never imagined she would turn against him. Then Lily continued quietly, "But the emails proved my grandma was telling the truth." Daniel handed her printed copies carefully. "Can you identify these?" "Yes." "What stood out to you most?" Lily's hands trembled visibly, holding the papers. "This one." Daniel displayed the email on the courtroom monitor. "Between us, my mother is not actually senile yet." Silence swallowed the room again. Judge Whitmore stared directly at Jason now. Not with sympathy, with concern. Real concern. Lily's voice became stronger suddenly. "My dad kept telling everybody Grandma was confused," she whispered. But privately, he admitted she wasn't. Tears rolled down Amanda's face openly now. Jason looked furious, humiliated, cornered. Daniel stepped back slowly. No further questions. Richard stood reluctantly for cross-examination. But the damage was already catastrophic. Still, he tried. "Lily, is it possible you misunderstood your father's intentions?" "No." "You were emotional during this situation, correct?" "Yes. And teenagers sometimes misinterpret adult conversations." Lily looked directly at him. "My dad said once people believe an old woman has dementia, nobody listens to her anymore." The courtroom fell silent again. Richard slowly lowered his papers. Cross-examination ended almost immediately after that, because there was nothing left to salvage. The illusion had collapsed. Then something happened. Nobody expected. Amanda suddenly stood. "Your Honor." Richard turned sharply. "Amanda, sit down," but she ignored him. Her mascara had streaked beneath her eyes now. "I didn't want this to go this far." Jason stared at her in shock. Amanda's voice shook violently. At first it was supposed to just be temporary financial control. My stomach turned. Jason whispered harshly, "Amanda." But panic had taken over her now. He said his mother wouldn't even notice eventually. "Stop talking," Jason hissed. Amanda looked completely shattered. He kept saying he deserved the house after everything Harold put him through. Jason stood abruptly. "You're blaming this on me now. There wouldn't be any of this without you." The courtroom erupted into chaos instantly. Judge Whitmore slammed her gavel sharply. Enough. Jason looked completely different now. No calm smile. No grieving son act. Just rage. Raw and ugly. And suddenly, everyone finally saw what I had been seeing for months. Not concern. Control. Not love. Manipulation. Judge Whitmore stared coldly at Jason. "Mr. Hicks, based on the evidence presented today, this court has serious concerns regarding your conduct toward Mrs. Hicks." Jason looked like he wanted to argue, but for once, he had no script left. No performance left. Only truth. And truth was finally louder than his lies. I sat there trembling quietly while tears filled my eyes. Not because I had won yet, because after months of being treated like my voice no longer mattered, people were finally listening to me again. The courtroom felt strangely hollow after the hearing ended, like a storm had passed through and left everything standing but permanently changed. Jason sat motionless at the defense table while Richard Coleman whispered urgently beside him. Amanda cried quietly into a tissue without looking at anyone. And Lily stood near the back wall alone, staring at the floor like she no longer recognized her own family. I understood that feeling, because I barely recognized mine either. Judge Whitmore reviewed documents silently for several long minutes before finally speaking. "This court finds insufficient evidence to support a guardianship order against Mrs. Noelle Hicks." Relief hit me so suddenly I almost couldn't breathe. Not joy. Not triumph. Relief, the kind that comes after surviving something that nearly destroyed you. Judge Whitmore continued calmly. "Furthermore, the evidence presented raises serious concerns regarding attempted coercive control, financial manipulation, and potential elder abuse." Jason's face drained of color completely. Amanda closed her eyes. Richard lowered his head slightly. The judge looked directly at Jason now. "Mr. Hicks' concern for a parent does not justify deceptive conduct or attempts to undermine that parent's legal autonomy." Jason finally spoke, his voice tight with desperation. "You don't understand. I understand enough," the judge interrupted sharply. Silence. Cold. Absolute. Then came the sentence Jason never expected to hear. "I am referring several aspects of this matter for further review regarding possible fraud and financial misconduct." Amanda began crying harder immediately. Jason stared at the judge in stunned disbelief. "Because manipulators often believe consequences are things that happen to other people. Not them. Never them." Judge Whitmore turned toward me then. "Mrs. Hicks, this court recognizes your legal competence and fully restores any temporary review restrictions requested during this proceeding." Fully restores. The words echoed through me. Mine. My life was still mine. My house. My decisions. My name. For months, Jason had slowly tried convincing the world I no longer belonged to myself. And now, in one courtroom statement, that lie collapsed publicly. The hearing officially ended minutes later. People began filing quietly out of the courtroom, whispering to one another. But something had changed in those whispers too. Before they questioned me, now they questioned him. My brother Thomas approached me slowly near the aisle. He looked ashamed. "I'm sorry, Noelle." I stared at him for several seconds. "You believed him?" Thomas lowered his eyes. He sounded convincing. That hurt more than I expected. Because it was honest. Jason had sounded convincing. That's what manipulative people do best. They don't simply lie. They perform sincerity. Thomas swallowed hard. "I should have trusted you." Part of me wanted to forgive him immediately. Another part wasn't ready yet. So instead, I simply nodded once. Then I walked toward Lily. The second she saw me approaching, tears filled her eyes again. "I'm sorry," she whispered instantly. I wrapped my arms around her tightly. "You saved me." "No," she cried softly. "I should have realized sooner. You were a child caught in an adult nightmare." She held on to me harder after that. And in that moment, I realized something painful. Jason hadn't only damaged his relationship with me. He had shattered his daughter's trust in him forever. Across the courtroom, Jason suddenly stood and approached us. Every muscle in Lily's body stiffened immediately. "Lily," he said carefully, "can we talk?" She stepped closer to me instead. That small movement wounded him visibly. Good. For the first time, he was feeling a fraction of the fear he had caused everyone else. Jason looked at me then, and suddenly, he looked tired. Not defeated exactly, just exposed. The mask had finally fallen away completely. "I never wanted this to happen," he said quietly. I stared at him in disbelief. "You planned this for months. You don't understand the pressure I was under." There it was again. Pressure. Always pressure. Never accountability. "You tried to erase my independence. I was trying to secure the future." "No," I answered softly. "You were trying to secure your future." Jason's expression hardened slightly. "You think you're innocent in all this?" The question shocked me. "I buried your father alone," he snapped suddenly. "I handled everything after he died, while you fell apart." I stared at him. Because buried underneath all the greed and manipulation, there it was. Resentment. Old resentment. Jason continued, voice shaking now. "Dad always protected you first." The courtroom around us faded into background noise suddenly. I remembered Amanda's words in my kitchen. "He thinks Harold loved you more." Jason laughed bitterly. "You know what Dad left me lectures? Expectations? Disappointment?" "That's not true. He never respected me the way he respected you." Pain crossed his face so quickly, it almost looked like the little boy he used to be. Almost. Then it disappeared again. "But this," he said quietly, "this was still wrong." Finally, one honest sentence. Not enough, but honest. Amanda slowly approached beside him, mascara streaked beneath exhausted eyes. "I'm sorry too," she whispered. I looked at her calmly. "Why didn't you stop it?" Amanda broke down, crying completely then. "Because we were drowning financially." There it was, the truth beneath everything. Debt, fear, greed, desperation. But desperation doesn't excuse cruelty, and grief doesn't give someone permission to steal your life. Daniel appeared beside me quietly. "We should go." I nodded slowly. But before leaving, I turned back toward Jason one final time. "I'm changing my will." His face flinched immediately. Interesting. Even now, some part of him still thought about inheritance first. I noticed the reaction instantly. So did he. Shame flickered across his features. I'm not changing it because I hate you, I continued quietly. I'm changing it because you taught me something. Jason stared silently. Trust without boundaries becomes permission for abuse. The words landed hard between us. Then I took Lily's hand and walked away. Outside the courthouse, cold wind swept across the city streets. For several seconds, none of us spoke. Then Lily asked quietly, "What happens now?" I looked up at the gray Ohio sky. The truth was, I didn't fully know. Investigations might follow, charges maybe. Family relationships would never fully recover. Some wounds don't heal cleanly. Still, for the first time in months, I felt something unfamiliar returning slowly inside me. Peace. Not complete peace, but the beginning of it. Because even though Jason had tried to take my voice, he failed. And now the world finally knew the difference between a confused old woman and a woman who refused to disappear quietly. The first morning after the hearing, I woke up before sunrise. For several seconds, I lay completely still in bed, listening to the silence inside the house. No tension, no fear. No waiting for Jason to walk through the front door carrying another folder full of lies. Just silence. Real silence. The kind I used to hate after Harold died. Now it felt different somehow. Peaceful. I walked downstairs slowly and stood in the kitchen watching pale morning light spill across the countertops. Dust floated lazily through the air near the windows. For the first time in months, I realized something surprising. I could breathe again. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. The court investigation into Jason's financial conduct continued quietly over the following weeks. Daniel handled most of the legal conversations, so I didn't have to relive every painful detail repeatedly. Apparently, several signatures on banking-related paperwork raised serious concerns. The bank employee from the hearing agreed to provide a statement. So did the branch manager. Amanda cooperated too. That part still saddened me deeply. Not because I wanted Jason protected from consequences. Because once a family reaches the point where people begin gathering evidence against each other, something sacred has already broken. Jason called several times after the hearing. At first I answered. The first conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. I made mistakes, he said quietly. Yes. But you humiliated me. I remember staring silently out the living room window after he said that. Humiliated him. Even then, part of Jason still centered himself in the damage. You tried to take my life away from me, I answered calmly. It wasn't supposed to go that far. But it did. Silence. Then eventually he whispered, I don't know how things got this bad. I almost answered honestly. One compromise at a time. One lie at a time. One justified cruelty at a time. That's how. But instead, I simply said, neither do I. After that, the calls became less frequent. Eventually, they stopped altogether. I later heard Amanda moved out temporarily with Lily to stay with her sister. Jason's real estate firm quietly suspended him during the investigation. People who once admired him now avoided eye contact in grocery stores. Funny how quickly public perception changes once the performance collapses. But despite everything, I didn't feel victorious. That surprised some people. My cousin Ellen called one afternoon and said, At least you won. Won. I understood what she meant. Legally, yes. Emotionally, no mother truly wins something like this. Because even after the lies are exposed, you still grieve the child you thought you knew. A month after the hearing, Lily came over carrying paint samples. I'm tired of these depressing walls, she announced dramatically. I laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. Real laughter, not forced politeness, not nervous performance. We spent the entire afternoon repainting the guest bedroom pale blue, while old Motown records played through Harold's ancient stereo system. At one point, Lily accidentally got paint in her hair and nearly cried laughing at herself in the mirror. Watching her heal slowly helped me heal too, because Jason had almost destroyed her trust in people entirely. Some nights she still cried unexpectedly. Not always because of anger. Sometimes because children, even older children, still love their parents after terrible things happen. That's the cruel complexity of family. Love doesn't disappear just because trust does. One evening, while we sat on the porch drinking iced tea, Lily asked quietly, "Do you think you'll ever forgive Dad?" I thought about the question for a long time before answering. I don't know. She looked down sadly. But I know something important now. What? Forgiveness and access are not the same thing. Lily frowned slightly. I can forgive someone someday, I explained softly, and still never allow them to hurt me again. She was quiet after that, then she nodded slowly. I think she understood. Around early spring, Daniel helped me finalize changes to my estate documents. Jason remained included in the will, but under strict conditions, not because he earned trust back, because I refused to let bitterness become the final author of my life. That distinction mattered deeply to me. Harold used to say, pain changes people, but it reveals character too. I finally understood what he meant. The biggest change came unexpectedly a few months later. Dr. Keller invited me to speak privately with a local support group for older adults dealing with financial abuse and family coercion. At first, I refused immediately. The idea terrified me. Public speaking had never been my strength, even before all this happened. But then I remembered sitting alone at my kitchen table months earlier, genuinely wondering if I was losing my mind, because someone I loved kept telling me I was. And suddenly, I realized how dangerous silence can become. So I agreed. The first meeting only had 11 people, mostly older women, a few men, some embarrassed, some frightened, some angry. One woman cried halfway through my story. Another admitted her son had been pressuring her to sign over property too. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in my car and cried harder than I had in months. Because suddenly, I understood something heartbreaking. This happens far more often than people realize. Not always through screaming or violence. Sometimes through concern, through manipulation, through slowly convincing someone they no longer trust themselves. Eventually, the support meetings became regular, then larger. Daniel jokingly called me retired and accidentally dangerous. Lily designed flyers online. Dr. Keller connected us with community resources. And somehow, without planning it, the worst experience of my life slowly became something capable of helping others. One warm evening, nearly a year after the hearing, I stood in Harold's garden trimming roses while the sunset painted the sky gold and pink. The house looked beautiful again. Alive again, not haunted by fear anymore. Lily sat on the porch doing homework while music drifted softly through the open windows. For the first time since Harold died, home finally felt like home again. Then my phone buzzed quietly in my pocket, a text from Jason. Simple, no manipulation, no performance. Just 4 words. I'm sorry, Mom. I stared at the screen for a very long time, then slowly locked the phone without replying. Not because I hated him, because healing takes longer than apology, and some wounds deserve honesty more than quick forgiveness. Still, as I looked around the home Harold built and the life I nearly lost, I realized something important. Jason tried to convince the world I was becoming invisible, forgettable, powerless. Instead, I found my voice again. And once a woman finds her voice after nearly losing it, she never surrenders it quietly again. Sometimes the deepest betrayal does not come from strangers. It comes from the people who know exactly how to make you doubt yourself. Aging does not make someone worthless. Grief does not make someone weak. And needing love does not mean someone deserves control over your life. If there is one thing I learned through all of this, it's that silence can become dangerous when someone is rewriting your reality for you. Speak up early, protect yourself early, and never confuse manipulation with care simply because it's wrapped in soft words. Family should protect your dignity, not slowly take it away. And if you are watching this tonight, while carrying pain you rarely speak about, please know this: you are not invisible, and you are not powerless. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had someone try to control your life while pretending it was for your own good? I truly read every comment. And before you go, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now.